Welcome to MMA on the Rocks. My name is Bill Welker. You are listening to episode 182 of the podcast, or you're joining us live here on YouTube. Today is Sunday, March 22nd, and I definitely don't want to turn this into a coronavirus COVID-19 podcast because you guys have probably been hearing too much about that stuff, but it's not like I can just ignore it because it's affecting everything, including, the main subjects of this podcast. But before we get into anything at all, let me introduce all the way from very secluded, on lockdown, quarantine, New Jersey, Jeff, the Animal Wilson. Jeff, how you doing, my man? This has got to be some of the craziest times of our lives right now. What's going on, man?
Bill, we talked a little bit about this before the show started, but New Jersey, New York, the tri-state area is kind of quarantined, locked down. Nobody's in the streets. And Bill, I picked a really bad time to start reading this book, American Psycho, by Bret Easton Ellis. Bill, it's starting to make me think of Actually, let me not get into it, Bill. We'll get discontinued by the FDA or whatever, or the USADA, whatever.
I don't think we can get discontinued. I don't think anybody is of importance is watching or listening. And
all right, well, in that case, Bill, this guy Patrick Bateman, man. I'll be honest with you, Bill. I'm a big fan of the movie because of Christian Bale, and I think that the movie is slightly better than the book in this case. The book is about 400 pages long, and it gets kind of repetitive with him killing prostitutes and eating their brains and stuff. Mm-hmm. So, you just get a little tired of reading that after a while. And I'm just like, is there a point to this story? Or is it just you being whatever? I'm sure that there are people who really enjoy this book. I'm not knocking them. It's not a bad book. I just prefer the movie. But, Bill, I'm going a little stir crazy. I've been looking for indoor workouts to do. Started doing some yoga just to get my body moving. But, Bill, I got to tell you, man, as someone who's more of an introvert, and, I don't mind staying at home every now and then. I don't mind days where I can just be lazy and not do anything and just stay home and read. But, Bill, man, too many of these, and I'm starting to go stir crazy. I'm starting to wonder how long it would take me to control squirrels with my mind if I tried. So, Bill, I didn't realize how important human interaction was.
Yeah, well, luckily we're able to do this podcast from the comfort of our own home, so we can have interactions like these and hopefully provide an hour or so of distraction for everybody who we're fortunate enough to have tuned into the show. But yeah, man, it's wild times right now. And wondering what the point of the story is how I've been feeling watching the news lately. And this thing is wild. And it seems like it's being talked about just to talk about it. I'm definitely a proponent of everybody being safe. If you're able to stay home, don't go out. Hopefully you have enough food and supplies stocked up for your families, everything like that. I hope everybody's making smart decisions out there. But yeah, as far as going stir crazy at home, I think it's just a mental obstacle, because you tend to enjoy those low key days at home, which I don't get many of those either, and I haven't even had them. Just because I have so many projects around my house that have just been piling up that I've been busy nonstop, even though I've been staying home. Usually on the weekends I'm off at Disney World or doing some kind of activity that is planned for me. That involves toddlers and all kinds of fun stuff. But I've been home. I think you have to get over that mental obstacle of not having the choice to leave home, because most of us all the time are like, wow, I wish I didn't have to go to work. I could just stay home. And now you have the ability to do that. In fact, it's being mandated for a lot of people, and people are like, well, I don't want to be home. So it's just really the psychological aspect of getting over, like, this is where I need to be right now for the sake of mankind and for the sake of the safety of myself and my family, and figure out what you need to do at home. I've been doing workouts in my garage. Definitely don't just sit on the couch and binge watch Netflix. I haven't been watching much television at all, just because it's gonna rot your body and your mind. Figure out what needs to be done. I mean, you're in your house where, there are little projects that you've been putting off and now's the time to get those things done. For example, Jeff, I was telling you yesterday, my daughter's swing set. If you guys have been listening to the show for over a year, you remember me telling the story of me building this swing set, which, was a pretty intensive project, because I decided not to get one of those prefabricated ones because I live in Florida and it's really humid, and the type of materials those things are made out of just can't stand up to the humidity in Florida, and they wouldn't last very long. So I went out and got some pressure treated lumber, and I hung up the swings in between two trees. Well, since that time, one of the trees has died, and in fact, the top half of it completely fell off and fell over the fence. Luckily, my favorite neighbors are the neighbors to the south of my house, which is just a utility field and a forest and a fence that the city put up. So I definitely enjoy those neighbors. But so this tree's dead, and maybe the swing set is the only thing holding it up. I don't know. But I decided I had to come up with a solution to keep it standing, because my daughter really loves the swing sets. If you guys follow my personal social media accounts, you always see all I do is post pictures of my daughter on there, and a lot of times it's on her swing set. So what I figured out I had to do is put a concrete base in the ground about 3 feet deep, and then attach a post to it, and then screw the current crossbar into that post, cut down the dead tree, and then cut off the excess crossbar. So that's what I did yesterday. It was the first phase, pour the concrete. I haven't messed with concrete too much, Jeff, but I always cement too.
Bill, I know you came up with that as soon as you finished that job. Oh man, you've been holding on to that one.
Anyway, so my buddy Matt came over yesterday and helped me pour the concrete, and we had a good time with that. It went smoother than I anticipated, so now I just gotta wait till it's dry enough to drill holes into it. But yeah, I have a ton of things like that around the house that I need to get to, and I'm probably going to continue going to work this coming week, because we run a small business that I don't really talk about on the show, but we run a small business in Tampa, and we gotta continue putting out orders as long as possible so we can keep paying our employees and taking care of them. And there's a lot of variables that go into what's going on in the world right now. Small businesses are taking a huge hit. Yeah. Big businesses are taking a huge hit. This thing is going to totally restructure the entire economy. And again, I don't want to get too deep into it, but here we have an issue that started in China, and because of that, they had to close down a lot of factories that produce medical supplies for a majority of the world. So when the rest of the world is essentially shutting down to try and stop the spread of this thing, they're having a hard time getting these medical supplies because of all these things not coming out of China that we need, like masks and things like that. And it's really going to make a lot of people rethink a lot of things and restructure a lot of things. And that's some of the positive that's going to come out of it, I think, because we realize once we've had to deal with something like this, how can we prepare for it in the future? And that goes from everybody, from people running small businesses to people who are employees of businesses to large businesses. Everybody's got to have a plan to account for this kind of thing. You just can't you can't just keep living like paycheck to paycheck and hoping to hang on and just hoping like no disasters ever come up, because things happen. And I think this is a big learning experience for everybody. I hope everybody comes out of this having learned something and is able to bounce back from it. But other than that, I don't have too much else to say about it. I can recommend for you, if you want some mental, some attitude adjustment, I can recommend for you my buddy Steve Maraboli's podcast, Whispers of Genius, Echoes of Madness. He just put out a new episode where he kind of talks about everything going on and how you need to pay attention to the people in your life. And I thought it was really cool the way he talked about it. Just pay attention, like while you're in isolation and quarantine, pay attention to the people in your life that you miss, and pay attention to the people that, when you think about them and you have this time away from them, if they stress you out or if they cause any sense of toxicity in your life. And he gets deeper into it. He's a behavioral scientist expert, but if you're looking for something a little different, go check that out. Steve, of course, is the host of the MMA and Beyond podcast with Ray Longo and the Manimal, which unfortunately is on hiatus because they don't want to do it remotely, even though I have offered my services to help them do so. I do miss my Ray Longo fix, but and the Manimal too. I'm worried about the Manimal, Jeff, because I see him on Instagram with a grappling dummy that he's put a CPR mask on for some reason. So Manimal, if you're listening, bud, that's not going to protect you from anything. But and the saddest part is that the grappling dummy tapped him out. So his jiu-jitsu's already gotten worse. Here's a second degree black belt who is tapping to a grappling dummy. So who knows how bad the rest of our jiu-jitsu has gotten during all of this shit. Obviously, this is where we kind of transition into how all this is affecting, the main topics of this podcast, being MMA and grappling and jiu-jitsu, because a lot of gyms have had to close their doors. A lot of states have mandated it. So that includes like, professional fighters. This definitely affects. And, I don't want to make light of anything else, anyone else who's affected by this, but in transitioning back to the essence of this podcast, talking about the MMA fighters, some of them have fights scheduled that have not been canceled, in the later parts of April and beyond. But it's got to be hard to train. I've seen videos of them training in garages and hitting mitts and trying to run outside and do whatever they can to stay in shape. But this puts a hindrance on being able to spar and being able to do a lot of things that help prepare for a mixed martial arts fight. And I don't know really what the solution is. I plan to have some fighters on the show in the coming days, especially if I'm going to be quarantined myself. I'll continue to put content out for you guys, and I'll interview some fighters and see how they're kind of coping with this thing. But give me your thoughts, Jeff. How do you see this? I mean, aside from us losing all these MMA fights, which, personally, I don't care that much. I'd rather see everybody out there, worrying about their health first and foremost. I don't want to see anybody putting themselves at risk, even though it means that we've lost Khabib and Ferguson for the 5th time. It's not even a thought in my head personally, like, oh no, we lost this fight again. It's more like, oh no, humanity is in trouble. But it is unfortunate because, a lot of these fighters, they don't make a ton of money. So they're scraping to get by, and their gyms are all closed. So they can't really train. So I don't know, just give me your thoughts on the current landscape of MMA amidst this global crisis here, Jeff.
Yeah, Bill, I think that's, for me, that's kind of taking a back burner. I was never thinking, oh, it sucks. We're not going to get Khabib versus Tony Ferguson. That can happen another time.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, dude, it's crazy the times that we're living in, and I think that one of the going back to what you were saying about this being a psychological thing about staying home, I think it's more a philosophical thing too. I think people just hate that choice, that free will being taken away from them.
Mm.
I think that's a big issue too, because a lot of us, like you said, we have time to do projects at home, and instead it's easier to go out and have fun and stuff like that. So, I think there's a lot to consider. I got some things at home that I want to do, some books that I've been putting off because I'm always reading for class and stuff. So, it's not all me going stir crazy. I'm trying to, like I said, just keep my body moving, working out in my front yard and stuff, and in my backyard, reading a little bit more. And as for the MMA thing, like we were saying, that can happen later. For now, it's important that people use logic in these times. It's important that we, stay at home and just keep this thing from spreading, keep this thing contained.
Mhm.
And Bill, I'm a bit of a skeptic. I'm into conspiracy theories and all that, which I'm not going to
Mhm.
get into, but you know, I feel like the media is a big part of this too. I feel like, don't get me wrong, I think it's important to take precautions, but I also think that people are blowing this out of proportion. I think that people are more concerned than they should be. If we take the right steps, I think we can contain this thing. The fact that it took the entire world to end for people to learn to wash their hands when they go to the bathroom, I think is terrible. I think that that's stuff that I do, before all this started. So I think that if we're just a little bit more careful, a little bit more precautious, that we'll be fine, man. We've
Yeah.
come back from swine flu, SARS, the Ebola virus, Spanish flu, things that people at the time, were freaked out about. We found solutions to those things, and I believe we'll find a solution to this too. I just think we need to be patient. It sucks. It looks like a situation that's going to be longer than a couple of weeks. In New Jersey, the governor's there's been talk about him, you know, ending the school year early.
Mhm.
And as a teacher, I'm always saving up money during the school year because I know there's going to be a time where I'm not working. So, I'm okay for a bit. But yeah, I think, um, I think with reasoning and logic, I think fools rush in. So I think we need to just take the right approach to this, and I think we'll be fine, Bill.
Yeah, I think so too. And as part of the media, uh, we have to do our part too. And I promise you guys we wouldn't get too deep into this thing, but here we are 18 minutes into the show, and it's pretty much all we've talked about. It's hard. It's hard to kind of break away from it, but I promise you guys there's content coming. I want to definitely act as a distraction. I don't consider myself, part of the any media group that you should be getting any real information from. I give you my opinions on fighting and drinking. Um, and just because we have this platform, we shouldn't be telling people, how to act or what to do or what to be afraid of and whatnot. So let's get away from it, Jeff. Let's talk about some fights, man. So you and I decided we've been talking about this for the longest time, where we do an episode of our top 5 favorite fights. And now seems like as good a time as any to do this because a lot of people are home with nothing to do. Maybe we can give them some suggestions for some old fights to go back and watch. There's no new fights coming up. There's no other live sports going on. So why not do it right now? Well, turned out for both of us, it turned to be a more difficult task than we both anticipated. I couldn't put together a list 1 through 5 because as I was doing this, I realized there are so many fights that for me personally were amazing, but I can't convince you all that are listening to this show that they were great. Because everybody has a different interaction with a fight. Whereas, something might have been going on with me personally in my life, or something was going on at the time that I watched this fight that made it that much more important and made it stand out to me. Um, that if you were to go back and watch it, you'd be like, what the fuck is Bill talking about? This fight was terrible. But there are so many different things, like you have so many different emotional attachments. So I'm going to do my best and try to give you guys a couple of fights to go back and watch. And I know Jeff will do the same. We have not compared lists, so we may have some that are the same. And but Jeff, my thought is to just kind of go back and forth, and I'll give you the floor first. And I don't have an order. I don't have like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I just have a list of fights. I have more than 5 in front of me, but I'm gonna try and keep it to 5. But let's just get into it, man. Give me a fight. What's a fight that to you, when you think about the best fights of all time, just kick this thing off and look whatever you have in front of you. Just give me a fight.
Yeah, dude, I actually got a couple on my list. And same thing as you, Bill. They're not in any particular order. I definitely have a favorite, but I'll leave that one for a little bit later on. But one of my favorite fights that I remember watching, I was in college, and this is a little bit of context of why it means so much to me. But I was in college and I was finishing up, and I never liked UFC. I always thought it looked stupid to me. Two guys fighting in a cage. I always thought it was ridiculous. And then,
and look at you now.
Yeah, dude. Now I can't get enough of it. And I was looking to do something in terms of self-defense. So I didn't want to do like Taekwondo or one of those sports where it's all about winning points. So I, started doing some research, and I knew that Brock Lesnar was actually in the UFC, that he had become the heavyweight champion. And as a big WWE fan, I was like, okay, I didn't know this guy could even fight. So, let me check out some of his stuff. So one of the biggest fights, and this actually is one of the reasons I got into jiu-jitsu as soon as I finished college and was working more and could afford it. Mm-hmm. I remember Brock Lesnar fighting against Shane Carwin, man. If you guys ever saw that fight, it's Brock Lesnar hadn't fought in, I want to say like a year and a half, because he'd gotten some type of surgery. I think that was when he got
diverticulitis.
Yes, thank you. So they pulled half of his lower intestine and part of his colon out of his ass, and
well, yeah, I don't think they pull it, Jeff. I think they surgically remove it.
Yeah, but don't they remove it through his ass?
Yeah, but I don't think they just yank it out of there. They go in and like make some precise incisions, and they don't just go yanking his asshole out of it.
All right, well, that makes more sense. I'm putting it in layman's terms, Bill. So anyway,
that's important for probably listeners of this show.
Yeah, so for me, in round 1, Shane Carwin, beats the crap out of Brock Lesnar, and it looks like he's gonna finish Lesnar in that first round. Shane Carwin's coming in; he's on a hot streak. I think he's won either 5 or 10 fights straight, and he's the interim heavyweight champion. So Shane Carwin comes in, looking to take Lesnar's head off, swinging for the fences. And Brock Lesnar's someone who does not like getting punched in the face. If you've ever seen his fights, his first couple of fights, he really didn't enjoy it. He hadn't gotten hit clean yet. And then when he fought Shane Carwin and he got hit for the first time, he covered up really quick. And in the second round, Brock Lesnar comes back out. Shane Carwin's exhausted from all the energy output he's had, trying to finish Lesnar. He spent 5 minutes, looking for the finish, and he's exhausted. And then Brock Lesnar wins with a arm triangle choke. And I was like, holy crap. Like, something happened there that worked. And, that's when I started watching the old UFCs, when Royce Gracie beat... what's his name? The wrestler, not Dan Severn. Was it Dan Severn? What did he beat at UFC 1? Do you remember? Might have been Dan Severn. But anyway, Royce Gracie, this little guy tapping out the massive Dan Severn who's been on top of him for 25 minutes. And I was like, okay, this is what I want to learn. This is the martial art that I want to learn for self-defense, and it all started with Brock Lesnar versus Shane Carwin. I think it was UFC 160 something. But anyway, for me, that was an awesome fight. I think you should go back and check that one out. All right, Bill, I'm passing the buck over to you, bud.
Yeah. Just to comment on that fight though, because that is and I believe it was Ken Shamrock in that final of UFC 1. I think it was UFC 2 or 3 that he fought Dan Severn. Dan Severn came along a little bit later, but yeah, I think it was Hoist Gracie and Ken Shamrock. But yeah, Shane Carwin. A lot of people listening to the show may not even remember Shane Carwin because you gotta keep in mind that modern MMA fans, kind of picked up the sport in the Conor McGregor era.
Yeah.
Shane Carwin was a guy who was a fucking monster and could have been one of the greats of all time, in my opinion. And he was like a real blue collar guy. He was working full time as an engineer while he was in the UFC and while he was the interim champion. Just a monster of a man, and so much muscle on him. And I think he was anticipating just putting Lesnar out in that first round, but wasn't able to do it. And Lesnar at the time, I think, had just gotten his blue belt in jiu-jitsu. So, still fairly inexperienced as a submission grappler. But of course, NCAA, All-American, national champion, all those accolades. And yeah, I'm glad you brought that fight up too, because I remember I was really into MMA at that point. And when Lesnar made his debut, I had a buddy who was really into the WWE, and he had told me, like, oh, you got to watch out for this guy. He's a fucking monster. And he was going to fight Frank Mir. And I was like, Frank Mir is going to submit him in the first round. And I was so confident of this. And I went back and forth with this buddy of mine, like, you don't understand. Brock Lesnar is such a beast. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. He doesn't understand this world.
Yeah.
And sure enough, Frank Mir submitted him with a leg lock in the first round. It was a awesome time for me. So that's my Brock Lesnar moment. But let me give you another fight here. Looking at my list, I'm looking for a good transition. I have a couple that are starred here. I'm going to go with Dan Henderson and Vanderlei Silva Part 2. This was at Pride 33. And this fight was just an all-out slugfest. I mean, you got to remember at this time, Vanderlei Silva is one of the most feared men on planet Earth.
Oh, yeah.
If you've never seen vintage Vanderlei Silva, like back in the Pride days when he was on steroids and cocaine and would come out of the corner like a wild ass Tasmanian devil, a 205-pound Tasmanian devil. This guy was fucking terrifying, Jeff. I mean, they called him the Axe Murderer for a reason. But if you had to think of a guy who is like the definition of fearless, it's fucking Dan Henderson. I don't think I've ever seen a boring minute of a Dan Henderson fight. Yeah. This guy is going for broke every minute of every round of every fight he's ever been in, fought well into his 40s. This fight was a slugfest for the beginning half of it. And you got to remember too that Pride fights, the first round was 10 minutes long. So these guys swinging on each other. It ended with a nasty knockout by Dan Henderson with a huge left hook right at the end of the third round. It was such an epic finish, man, because here's Vanderlei Silva, the scariest dude walking the earth that a lot of people didn't know about because most people weren't watching Pride at this time. I'm going to look up real quick what year this is, Pride 33. But Dan Henderson, man, just one of my favorite. This was 2007. So yeah, not a lot of people, even if you were into MMA, you're probably only watching the UFC at this time. To watch Pride was, you had to have like a connection. Like you had to know somebody who knew how to get it. I used to buy the DVDs on eBay, and I used to wait for them to come in the mail and watch them. if I wasn't able to catch it live. It's not like today where like you miss a fight and you could find it streaming on the internet like within hours. Um, you know, this was back in the day when there wasn't even fights on like YouTube or anything. I used to rent fights at Blockbuster, Jeff. Like the UFC
Nice.
DVDs when I was in college, I would go and see whatever they would have, UFC like 20 something, 30 something, whatever it was. If I hadn't seen it, I would grab it and go watch it. But Dan Henderson, Vanderlei Silva too. And there are a lot of pride fights that came to mind. I didn't want to give too many pride fights on this list, but this one was always stood out to me just because the way it ended, the build up of the whole thing, the most feared guy against the most fearless guy. It was like a really cool storyline for me. And the whole thing was just a cool fight. Do you recall this one at all, Jeff? Have you seen it?
No, I don't think so. And Bill, it's funny because before you guys moved to Florida, you gave me a bunch of Pride DVDs, and I haven't had time to watch them. But I think I'm gonna dig into them this week. But no, I actually I'm looking for the fight on my phone. One of those websites that you mentioned has it, so I'm definitely gonna check it out because I know your list is gonna be different from mine. But yeah, that's definitely something I really want to go back and watch because Dan Henderson and Vanderlei Silva, they have defined their generations of MMA, man. And like you said, Henderson fought into his 40s, almost beat Michael Bisping for the middleweight belt into his 40s, which I really wanted to happen. I wanted to see that.
Some would say he did beat him and lost the decision.
I remember that fight. This is not on my list, but I do remember that fight. I think that Henderson landed the bigger shots, but Bisping landed more shots, and I felt like he controlled the octagon a bit more. But Henderson put him on his butt a few times, man, in that second fight. Yeah, if it had been like the first one, we'd be talking about a whole different Dan Henderson, man.
Dude, that's if we were making a list of top 5 finishes of all time, that's got to be on there. Oh, and the Dan Henderson Vanderlei Silva finish was similar, where he hit him with a huge except it was a left hook instead of the right overhand that it was in the Bisping fight. So he hits him with the left hook and then comes down with the flying forearm. That signature Dan Henderson, the Air Henderson forearm. Well, let's keep it rolling, Jeff. What else you got?
All right, so this is another fight that I was watching, when I was in college and trying to figure out what this jiu-jitsu thing was. Chael Sonnen versus Anderson Silva, Bill. The buildup was crazy. Chael Sonnen's been talking smack about Brazil for months now. Anderson Silva is clearly fed up with this, but he probably can't put it into words in English because, he doesn't speak English very well, still doesn't speak English very well. But Anderson Silva just, it's been building, man. Chael Sonnen is talking about his wife and how he would go into Silva's house and command his wife to make him a steak the way he likes it, and he'd slap her on the ass. Dude, so the build-up to this fight is crazy. And Chael Sonnen has been talking for months that he's going to take that belt from Anderson Silva, how he's already the middleweight champ, how Silva's challenging him for the belt. And Bill, it seemed very likely that was what was going to happen because for the first 4.5 rounds of that fight, it was all Chael Sonnen. Chael Sonnen had knocked Silva down with I think it was a jab, a really stiff jab, put Silva on his butt. When Silva didn't get knocked down by a strike, Chael Sonnen would wrestle him to the ground, was on top of him for 4 rounds, and even well into this 5th round, Chael Sonnen's still on top of him, and he's throwing little rabbit punches that aren't really doing damage, but are winning him points. Mm-hmm. So at this point, I've got this fight 5 rounds to 0. It's Chael Sonnen's fight to lose, and then Anderson Silva throws up a triangle, and Chael Sonnen, very intelligently is able to throw it off, but now his arm gets caught in an armbar, and he taps. And just like that, all the work that he had put in, talking smack, dominating Silva from the top position, putting him down, taking him down every single round, and keeping him down, all of that is lost. And Anderson Silva, and for me, one of the greatest comebacks. Another reason that I got into jiu-jitsu. Silva wins this fight, taps and Chael Sonnen out, and that was when I realized how special jiu-jitsu is, man. Because the tide of the fight can change from just one good position, one intelligent, built up moment, and I was just so in awe of Anderson Silva. I was like, holy crap! Like this guy might just be unbeatable.
Yeah. And I have this fight on my list as well. I have it written down here. This was UFC 117. I remember where I was watching this fight, which it was really a special one. I was up in the Adirondacks on vacation and bought the pay-per-view up there. And I was worried about whether or not there was going to be reception enough to watch it because, like you said, there was so much buildup. But at the same time, the consensus was Anderson Silva was going to completely demolish Chael
Oh
Sonnen,
yeah.
especially because of all the trash he was talking. And, he just talked his way into this fight. He didn't even deserve to be in there with him. And at the time, Anderson Silva was pretty much invincible.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
everybody thought he was unbeatable. It had been years since he had been beaten back in Japan. He was undefeated in the UFC. He came out of nowhere and just smashed everybody, walked right through the reigning champ, Rich Franklin,
Yeah.
easily twice, made him look like an amateur, basically. Rich Franklin, one of the baddest motherfuckers of all time.
Oh, absolutely.
So all that considered, going into this fight, you think Anderson Silva is just going to toy with Chael Sonnen and torture him. And I like the way you describe the fact that it was Sonnen holding him down, but you got to remember Chael Sonnen rocked him and dropped him with a big left hand in the first round. He beat him striking first and then made him worry about the takedown. Totally threw him off his game plan. Very underrated fight by Chael Sonnen, who is a very underrated fighter because over time he had become like a parody of himself. And especially when he went over to Bellator, he was just kind of playing a character and getting paid a bunch of money. And I think maybe got too comfortable in that role. But one of the most underrated fighters of all time, in my opinion. He'll be remembered as like the trash talking kind of cartoony WWE style guy who would lay and prey on people. But aside from world-class wrestling, he was an amazing boxer. Boxed up Rampage Jackson in his last fight. How many people can say they did that? Dominated that fight until the very last seconds. And he's even talked about how it was like a psychological loss, how he pictured himself getting submitted, like in multiple, he would play out the fight in his mind before it happened. And in multiple scenarios, he kind of imagined himself getting submitted, and it kind of came true, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier with, your attitude and the way you look at things. And, their self-fulfilling prophecies are a very real thing. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Is a very famous quote. I think Henry Ford said that. But don't quote me on that. But yeah, phenomenal fight. And I remember exactly where I was. And I remember thinking like, holy shit, he's going to beat Anderson Silva. He's going to become the world middleweight champion. This is a done deal. And then just out of nowhere, he gets caught in that triangle, which turned into a triangle armbar. And it was like, wow, what the fuck just happened? What the fuck just happened? This was in the bag. Like, even the Texas Athletic Commission wouldn't have fucked this decision up. They would have given it to Chael Sonnen. Like, this was a done deal. Even New York wouldn't have fucked this up.
Yeah.
The worst athletic commissions. Yeah, man. But yeah, great pick, Jeff. I'm going to give you another one here. I'm going to scale it back a little bit. I'm going to give you a more, I guess, obscure one. And it's Joe Lozon and Jim Miller Part 1. These guys fought twice. And I just remember at the end of this fight, just sitting there with my mouth hanging open. Like, these guys were a bloody mess. Um, and two of my favorite fighters, also, by the way, just really good guys. Like, they're actually good friends now. And they've had 2 wars in the octagon, spent 30 minutes in the cage together. But the first time they fought, it was UFC 155. And just slinging on each other. Big knees, big punches, ripping cuts open. I remember at the end of the fight, I can still picture it in my head. Like, I've gone back and watched it a couple of times, and I've looked at images of the end of this fight, but I remember watching the end of this fight, Joe Lozon sitting on the floor of the octagon, and his whole face covered with blood, except you could see like a little bit of white around his eyes. And I was like, that's one of the fucking craziest things I've ever seen. And then the fact that they went back and did it again and had another crazy war that was more grappling heavy the second time, but still very back and forth, very close fight. I thought Lozon won the second fight, but Jim Miller got the decision. The fact that they could all go through that, go through those 2 wars together and still be respectful, not only respectful, but friends. I've heard Joe Lozon appear on Jim Miller's podcast, and they just talk like, a couple old buddies that used to work at Sears together or some shit. Like, but they shared some epic fights, man. And that first one, it was like, it had everything you could want out of a fight. It had awesome grappling exchanges. It had close submissions from 2 notorious submission experts. I think Lozon is still one of the leaders in performance of the night bonuses. Jim Miller has submitted, the who's who. So that was a big one for me. And it was another one where it was like, I remember where I was when I was watching it, and my reaction to it immediately after, and just it always sticking out in my mind ever since. So yeah, that's one that I guess is a little more obscure. I mean, I've got some more like consensus greatest fights ever. If you're just joining the show, we're talking about our favorite MMA fights of all time. But yeah, Joe Lozon, Jim Miller won. The second one was a great fight too, but that first one, man, I just remember like my mouth hanging open at the end of it. Do you recall that one at all, Jeff?
Yeah, I actually need to go back and watch that one because I remember how the fight ended. I don't remember too much of the entirety of the fight, but I do remember how it ended. And dude, I just remember both of these guys being bloodied up, man, and just thinking these guys have gone through an absolute war. And that's one of those special fights, man, where everybody appreciates it. Everybody in the arena appreciates it. No matter who you were rooting for, you appreciated that fight. And that's there are a lot of fights like that are special.
Yeah, and that's why it was cool for me, because I wasn't rooting for anybody, because I'm a fan of both of those guys, and it's so rare that happens.
Yeah.
It's like I'm trying to think. There's a time recently where it happened where I was a couple of times recently where I was such big fans of both fighters. I think it was a Justin Gaethje fight, maybe Gaethje and Eddie Alvarez. But yeah, there are some fights where it's just like, oh, I don't know if I want to. Oh no, Gaethje and Cowboy.
Oh, that was a good one.
Yeah. Like, I don't want anybody to lose this fucking fight.
Yeah.
And those are always memorable, because they kind of understand, like, they respect each other, but like they know it may not be the fight we're asking for, but it's a fight we didn't know we needed. And that was Joe Lozon, Jim Miller for me. And it was a fight that not a lot of people were talking about, when it was made. And I was like, holy shit, Joe Lozon's going to fight Jim Miller. And everybody I knew at the time was like, "Who's Joe Lozon and Jim Miller?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But what else you got, Jeff?
All right, Bill. So, moving away from the more emotional fights that kind of got me into jujitsu, this is just more fights that I just really enjoyed watching. So, this next fight is a little bit. I didn't think I was gonna like it as much as I did until I watched it. So, this is the next one on my list is T.J. Dillashaw versus Henan Barao, the first fight. Because I didn't know anything about TJ Dillashaw, dude. I was like, all right, this dude from Team Alpha Male, I guess he's gonna get the same ass whooping everybody else has gotten, because Henan Barao was on an absolute tear. His fight with he was supposed to fight Dominic Cruz, who at this point in time is still the bantamweight champion. Henan Barao has become the interim bantamweight champion after defeating, I believe, Uriah Faber, and he was supposed to get a title fight against Dominic Cruz to unify the belts, but that never happened because of just bad luck for Dominic Cruz, a bunch of injuries. But anyway, so in steps in T.J. Dillashaw, and aside from his recent news headlines, which haven't been too flattering. I thought Henan Barao was going to take him out in one round. After all these guys from Team Alpha Male, guys like Chad Mendez, Uriah Faber have gotten title shots and failed. I was thinking, okay, here's another Team Alpha fail that's going to happen, to put it into Dominic Cruz's terminology. But anyway, TJ Dillashaw, the bell rings, and TJ Dillashaw starts dancing around him and just picks Henan Barao apart, man. From the first bell to the last round, absolutely a crowning performance for TJ Dillashaw. I didn't know he was going to do all that. I really didn't think that he stood a chance. And then my mouth hit the floor at the end of this fight. At the end of round 4, heading into round 5, I was like, this guy's all but won this fight, man. Like, there was no life left in Henan Barao. That will to fight it ceased to exist because TJ Dillashaw beat it out of him, literally. And, TJ Dillashaw, I knew he was a good wrestler coming out of Team Alpha Male, but he didn't use any of that. He didn't need any of that to beat Henan Barao. And in the 5th round, he just starts teeing off on him and finishes him. And then the same thing happened in the second fight too. But I just remember being so impressed by TJ Dillashaw's performance, man. And as soon as I heard about the rematch, I knew it wasn't going to go well for Henan Barao. But yeah, dude, that all stemmed from this first fight of just watching TJ Dillashaw just dismantle Henan Barao. And for me, it really put Dwayne Bang Ludwig on the map as a good coach for me, because I didn't know too much about him. I just knew that he worked with Team Alpha Male. And then, even when he went off on his own, he found much success with TJ Dillashaw. So for me, that was a great fight for both Ludwig and TJ Dillashaw. Seeing them hugging at the end of this fight, crying together, just huge moment, such an enjoyable fight, and just a masterful performance from TJ Dillashaw.
Yeah, for sure, man. And, you talked about the negative press from TJ Dillashaw, but Barao's another guy who, kind of fell off around the time USADA showed up in the UFC. He's now lost 7 of his last 8 fights. But yeah, I remember at that time, he seemed like, much like Anderson Silva going into the Chael Sonnen fight, he seemed like invincible. And Dillashaw definitely coming away with the upset there, would go on and knock him out twice.
Yeah.
So super impressive by him. And then that was the beginning of the end for Henan Barao.
Yeah, he never came back after that second fight.
Dude, anybody who's seen him fight in the last 5 years would probably be like, this guy sucks. And you don't even understand, how dominant. I mean, beat Uriah Faber twice, finished him once. Not a lot of people can put that on their resume. But yeah, that was definitely one of the bigger upsets of all time for sure.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, great pick, Jeff. I guess since we're going into more mainstream, um, more mainstream picks, like more consensus picks, I have to go with this one, and it's a bit cliche, but I don't care, Jeff, because this fight was incredible, and I'm talking about Forrest Griffin and
Mm.
Stephen Bonner, the first fight they had at the Ultimate Fighter Season 1 finale. And I remember exactly where I was watching this fight, Jeff. I was in my dorm room at the University of Albany, and I had a TV. We used to have like the dorm bed was right up against like this radiator, and it had like a wide windowsill, right? So I had this shitty little 13-inch TV that I had like on that wide windowsill, and I was sitting in my bed just watching this. Like I wasn't that into UFC at the time. I knew a little bit about it. I knew some of the fighters. I had seen a lot of the earlier stuff. You know, people had lent me videotapes and things like that. But I was watching this fight live, sitting in my little shitty dorm bed on my shitty blue sheets that I used to have on this thing, on my twin size bed with this 13-inch TV that was a combo TV VCR. Uh, you definitely can't find them anymore. It was a 13-inch screen. It was about the size of the laptop I'm talking to you on right now. And I remember sitting up in my bed and leaning forward and watching the screen like, what the fuck am I watching right now? What am I witnessing? This is not like anything I've ever seen in my life before. And I remember, you know, since that time, hearing Dana White talk about it, like people were calling each other and telling each other to put this fight on and to watch it. And that was not my experience personally. I wasn't calling anybody to tell them to turn it on, but I could see how people would be doing that, because I was like, these guys are just slinging punches at each other non-stop for 15 minutes. And at the end of it, I was like, I don't know who the fuck won this thing. Like, how do you score this? Like, how is this done? This is not like boxing or anything I've been experienced with. And the amount of MMA I've watched before that, and there weren't really decisions. Like a lot of it, you know, it would just go until somebody won. So this was my first experience that I remember having with like a decision in MMA. And when they said Forrest Griffin won, I was like, well, yeah, I guess so. I don't know. Like, to me, it looks like both of these guys lost. They're both a bloody mess. And I don't know if this fight holds up, Jeff. I haven't gone back and watched it in a while. I don't know if it holds up to the feeling I had when I watched it sitting in my dorm room or watching it on that 13-inch TV VCR combo that was sitting on my windowsill at the University of Albany. I don't know if it holds up to that, but I do remember the main event of that was Rich Franklin against Ken Shamrock. And after that, I was like, oh, well, I knew Ken Shamrock, you know, at that time he had done the WWE and all that stuff. And I knew he was in the early UFCs, and I was like, oh, well, Ken Shamrock's going to destroy whoever this is. And then Rich Franklin just smashed him. Like, wasn't even close. And I was like, who the fuck is this guy that just did that to Ken Shamrock? Like, so the whole card was an experience for me. And then it was after watching that I had gone back and watched the whole Ultimate Fighter Season 1, which I always tell people who are new getting into MMA, like, watch that season of The Ultimate Fighter, because I feel like that turned so many people onto the sport, because it showed the human side of these people. You know, you get to see that they're real people. They're not just barbarians that get in there and do this. You know, that's when you started to learn like 80% of these guys had college degrees and things like that. So yeah, and that's what I always try to do whenever we have fighters on this show too, because of that season of The Ultimate Fighter and because of the feelings that I had watching that finale. I always want to humanize these men and women who get in there and do this. So that's always my goal with this podcast and with interviewing fighters. But yeah, man. So Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonnar, probably, arguably the most important fight in the history of MMA because, there was management changes and there was a lot of questions as to whether or not MMA was even going to be a thing anymore. They took a risk. They went out and funded this thing on their own, the first season of Ultimate Fighter, and looked for a network that would show it after the fact, and lucked out with Spike TV picking it up and showing this finale and it picking up so much traction. If that fight had sucked, that might change the whole history of MMA, Jeff. We might not be sitting here right now.
Yeah.
So for all those reasons, aside from the fact that it was just an amazing fight, but if it wasn't, fuck, Jeff, we might not even have MMA right now. We might be having like NBA on the rocks right now or some other.
We wouldn't be talking about it, the NBA, Bill.
Yeah, that's true.
Basketball was never cool.
We would just be having on the rocks and all about alcohol.
Yeah. Bill, I think it's interesting that you bring up that fight because that's actually on my list too. And I remember just thinking the bloodbath of that fight. And at the end, I didn't know who won. I didn't think that both guys lost, but I couldn't tell you who won. And I didn't watch that fight live, but I have gone back and watched it because it was so, groundbreaking. And like you said, Bill, the UFC was in dire straits at this point in its history, man. Like all of its money was put into the Ultimate Fighter because a lot of states didn't want to sanction UFC. Everybody thought it was cockfighting because of John McCain. The only state who really sanctioned it is Las Vegas, Nevada at this point, and money's tight for the UFC. They're not filling seats. And this fight, man, this season of the Ultimate Fighter is, so important for the history of the UFC. And like you said, Bill, if this fight was bad or if it sucked, we could be living in a totally alternate timeline where maybe you don't move to Florida, Bill. Maybe you stay in New York and you never go to New Jersey at all, and then we never meet, and we end up. I end up with a podcast about I don't know, baseball cards or something. I don't know.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, because I didn't start training mixed martial arts until well after this. I had gotten home from college and I was working at the time, and I was so into MMA, and I had wrestled and done a little boxing in the past, and I was like, this is something, I feel like I could get into. And I even thought at the time I was going to fight. So that's when I joined Westchester Fight Club, which was my first gym back in New York. And my jiu-jitsu coach was a guy by the name of Stephen Williams, who is part of the Danaher Death Squad and just recently made his triumphant return to competition.
Nice.
Dude's a beast. Got his black belt in 4 years from Renzo Gracie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is an accomplishment in itself. And
we just got a live comment, Bill.
I'm gonna put it up. Let me just finish my thought here, and then we'll address this. I'll put it on the screen though. I lost my train of thought.
You were talking about how your first black belt got his black belt from
Stephen Williams. So they call him the prodigy for good reason, because he got his black belt in 4 years, which is unheard of. Usually it takes 10 to 12 years to get a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I'm at this thing 7 years, and I'm not even close to being a black belt. But here we got a live question from our buddy Jeff Bogman. He wants to know, can the animal's mom make some soup that will kill the coronavirus?
Jeff, I think she can. I just don't know how quickly we could get it mass produced. That's the only problem we're running into.
Yeah, especially because, the soup of the week is made from leftovers. So
Yeah.
she would have to make like multiple meals that the soup was made of to make the leftover soup that would kill the corona. Like, am I, am I not am I not explaining this properly? So, like, the soup is made of leftovers, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it you got to make 6 or 7 meals to make the soup.
yeah.
So to mass produce it, you got to make those 6 or 7 meals.
Yeah, so then they turned into like 48, 57 meals.
So the follow-up question is, so the soup is not ready?
No, not at the moment. We can't mass produce it yet. But um actually, I don't think there was soup this week. I think this week it was chickpeas, which I was trying to make into hummus, but apparently you need to add other stuff to it, so it didn't work out.
Yeah. Did you just think it was chickpeas?
Yeah, I thought I just mashed up some chickpeas in a blender and it'd be fine.
No, dude, you gotta add sesame seeds and some lemon in there at the minimum. I like a little garlic in there too if you're gonna make fresh hummus. But
Yeah.
this isn't recipes on the rocks, so let's get away from this. So Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner wants. If you're just joining us, like Mr. Bogman here, we're talking about our favorite MMA fights of all time. So if you have anything you want to contribute to that conversation, please feel free. What do you got, Jeff? What's next on the list for you? I know we shared a couple so far.
Yeah. Okay. So next on my list, sticking with the T.J. Dillashaw as bantamweight champion era of the UFC. Bill, you know how biased I am when it comes to talking about the bantamweights in the UFC. And Bill, if you didn't think that Dominic Cruz would make an appearance on this list, you're sadly mistaken, friend.
I'm
Because
surprised we haven't heard his name already. I thought he was going to be your whole top 5. Dominic Cruz's last 5 fights are the best fights of all time.
Actually, you're not too far off here. 2 of them are on this list. The first one, and this probably has there's a couple of Dominic Cruz fights, not to mention it, that could be on here, but I'm only going to give you one at a time. So, the first one for me, and this is just and this is probably my highest pick on this list, of strictly of Dominic Cruz's best fights, is Dominic Cruz versus TJ Dillashaw. Dominic Cruz, and I remember exactly where I was. I was visiting a friend, and Bill, you actually know her. She still trains at our gym where you were, where we actually met. And a friend of mine had she had torn her ACL in training, playing football or something. So me and my buddy, another buddy, we go to visit her, and it's all 3 of us. She's sprawled out on the couch because she can't move, and we got like chips and stuff, bunch of food. So and I tell her, listen, there's a specific reason that I go visit her, because I was telling her about Dominic Cruz and how he had 2 ACL surgeries, a groin tear that he was coming back from. And I was like, listen, an ACL, I know it sucks. I know it's going to take you a while to get back into training, but let's watch this fight so you can see that it can be done. So there's that context, but I wasn't really talking to anybody. I was happy to be there, but I was more into this fight, man, because Bill, at the end of this fight, I didn't know who won. And Bill, this was that fight where, like, if you ever played Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, it's like when you and your buddy pick the same character, their clothes are just different. That's what this fight was. TJ Dillashaw had basically been groomed by Team Alpha Male to mimic the movements of Dominic Cruz so that Team Alpha Male could figure out some way to beat this guy, because Dominic Cruz at this point has scalped several members of
Which they
Team
did,
Alpha.
because TJ Dillashaw won this fight, right?
No, he lost this one. Bill,
only according to the judges, Jeff.
Yeah, those are the only people whose opinion matter at this point.
No, I think my opinion matters. I'm part of the MMA media here. I'm a pretty dominant force in it, in fact.
No, I thought we concluded that we wouldn't have these varying opinions after we can't come to an agreement on John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson.
Yeah, we agree that John Jones won that fight clearly, 4 rounds to 1.
Oh, we never agreed to
I
that.
thought that was the conclusion that we both came to.
No, Gustafson won that fight 3 rounds to 2. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, that's what I said. John Jones won it 4 rounds to 1.
Anyway, going back to this fight, Bill. I'll be honest with you. I was so nervous at the end of this fight. Both of these guys fighting exactly the same way. TJ Dillashaw, he's been trained to mimic Dominic Cruz's movements, and he did it successfully, man. He looked great in there. They're dancing around each other, but it wasn't like boring. It was so interesting. Just the style matchup, the fact that Dominic Cruz, after coming back from 3 very serious injuries, and quite a number of surgeries, is able to get back in there and do what he did against TJ Dillashaw. And I'll be honest with you, Bill. This is definitely one to go back and watch. I've gone back and watched it a few times. For me, Dominic Cruz won, Bill, but at the end of this fight, seeing it live, I did not know who was going to get the decision. I could have seen it going for Dillashaw, but I felt like he just did not do enough in 5 rounds to win this one. I felt like Dominic Cruz just had that 1 round more than TJ Dillashaw, but I could have seen it going either way. But yeah, seeing Dominic Cruz win, and even after you saw him limping because he had some foot injury that was really, really bothering him throughout the fight. And, just seeing him come back after so many injuries, so many years of being on the shelf, for me, that was really special, man. I think it's a special fighter who can come in there after so much time off and come in, go 5 rounds with the champion. Because remember, Dominic Cruz at this point has been stripped of his title. He never lost it in an actual fight up until this point. He will lose it later. But huge result for Dominic Cruz. And I've always been a fan of his, but for me, just because of his story, his grit, for me, that was all cemented in this fight against TJ Dillashaw, which he won.
Yeah, I totally agree. Dominic Cruz was gifted a decision. Oh man! No, that is a great one. I actually had as an honorable mention. I don't want to make this my next fight, but Uriah Faber, Dominic Cruz 3, and just because you and I watched this one together, Jeff, we were at the beer spot in. Is that in Fort Lee?
Yeah, Bill. I don't think we watched that one together.
I think we did.
I don't think so.
I think we watched it at the beer spot.
You sure? I don't remember that.
At the very least, we watched a replay of it there, but I'm pretty sure we watched it live.
I don't know why. I cannot remember watching that.
Well, I guess it was just more meaningful to me than it was to you.
Yeah, probably.
In any case, I'll give you my next fight. All right. So I have an obvious choice, and I have a throwback pride choice, Jeff. I'll give you you make the decision here.
Let's go with a throwback pride, because we have a lot of more listeners who probably have come into the modern era. So let's throw it back for them.
Yeah, I mean, I have one that's probably on both of our lists because it's just such an obvious one. But Pride 21, Don Fry versus Yoshihiro Takayama. Jeff, to this day, this is one of the wackiest, most exciting things I have ever witnessed in my life. And I'm fortunate enough to have seen it without knowing what happens, because, it's a clip that since has been shared infinitely on the internet. Anybody who talks deep about Pride, about old school MMA knows about this fight. These two guys came out, literally grabbed each other by the back of the head and started throwing punches while pulling their opponent's head into their fist for, I don't know, 85 minutes. I don't know. How long did this go on, Jeff?
I think it was like 85 seconds, dude.
But it felt like 85 minutes when you're watching it.
Yeah.
And you're like, how long can this go on? And Takayama, who, to his credit, tough bastard. just not as tough as Don Fry. Don Fry is like the guy, like all those Chuck Norris quotes that people come up with.
Yes. Yeah.
Those are like actually about Don Fry. Like, I can't think of any of those Chuck Norris things right now, but any of them.
I got one for you. You know why there's no streets named after Chuck Norris, Bill? Because nobody crosses Chuck Norris.
Yeah, that's probably about Don Fry.
Yep.
Or like the cure for cancer in Don Fry's tears, but it's too bad Don Fry has never cried. Ever. I used to write a couple of those quotes.
Yeah.
Chuck Norris flosses with chicken wire.
or Don Fry doesn't go swimming. Water just wants to be around him.
So many good ones. Yeah, but in any case, man, if you're listening to this and you've never seen Don Fry versus Yoshihiro Takayama at Pride 21, that is a must-see for any MMA fan. It's nothing that could ever be replicated. Like, this will never happen again, especially because there are so many skilled fighters out there now. It would have to be like actually agreed upon between two fighters to reenact this, because it just can't. And at the end of it, Takayama wound up with hematomas around both of his eyes, couldn't see. Don Fry, just a bad fucking dude, man. He's the kind of guy that you expect. He's like in there in an MMA fight. He's got like a dip in his mouth.
Oh, he's just chewing tobacco.
Yeah, it's like fuck it. Like in between rounds, he's just spitting it out the side of the ring. Don Fry. Don Fry's a fucking gangster, man. He's so gangster. He probably goes to the grocery store like now without sanitizing his hands after.
Yeah, I don't think the coronavirus wants anything to do with him.
Yeah, the coronavirus is in quarantine from Don Fry.
Yeah, dude.
The coronavirus is afraid it's going to catch Don Fry. So it's
yeah. Bill, I think that in today's society, there's two things we got to worry about catching: the coronavirus and Don Fry's hands. Dude, oh man, I remember that fight very fondly. Never watched it live, but didn't know what the result was, and checked it out. And it's exactly the way you described it. They just hang on to each other and start swinging as hard as they can with their free hand until somebody falls and can't get up.
It's actually unbelievable. Like if you're a fan at all of MMA, which if you're an hour and 12 minutes into this podcast, obviously you're a fan of MMA, or like, I don't know, maybe you just like guys with beards and watching them drink whiskey and talk about stuff, or maybe there's just nothing else that's live right now because everybody's in quarantine. But in any case, if you've never seen this fight, you have to. This is a must watch, and that's why it's on my list. It's not like, oh wow, this was a really technical fight. Like, it wasn't, but it's just so fucking memorable, and just so amazing to watch. It's a spectacle, like, for sure. All right, Jeff, it's your turn. I got
what number fight is this? Is this number 4? Is this like the 4th?
Jeff, I have no fucking idea. I know it's probably my 4th glass of whiskey, but that's from the beginning of the podcast where we weren't talking about the best MMA fights of all time.
All right, so this might be number. Hold on. Whatever. Who cares? But like I said, there's.
I have done 4, so this will be your 5th fight because I put check marks.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is probably going to be, I guess we're just capping at 5 unless you want to keep going, which I have no problem with. I got nothing going on. But this is a special fight, Bill. This is the fight that we've never been able to agree on. Is John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson the first? Because Bill, for me, and I'm just going to speak from my perspective, and then you can tell me what you saw. For me, I saw a godlike performance from Alexander Gustafsson. This is the performance you put on when you're fighting the final boss of a video game on like the highest difficulty. All right, that's what this was. He made like no mistakes in this fight, dude.
Except losing it.
Dude, I thought he did everything well, man. I had him winning 3 rounds to 2. The first 3 rounds I thought was all Gustafsson. You know, he's taking John Jones down. This guy's a boxer, Bill, who just learned wrestling like after coming into the UFC and like fighting 5 or 6 times. That's when he started picking wrestling up. So for me, for him to do that to John Jones was absolutely astounding. He takes him down, I think, somewhere between 8 and 10 times throughout this fight. John Jones, Gustafsson stuffed probably about that many takedowns. Probably stuffed about 8 takedowns before John Jones took him down in like the 5th round. He was outboxing John Jones. He was outstriking him in the first 3 rounds. Making John Jones bleed, which I don't think I've ever seen that before. I think this was the first time I ever saw John Jones bleed. And I'm laughing because of your glasses, Bill.
You can't even say all this with a straight face, Jeff, because you know
because of your
lies.
glasses.
Because you know it's lies.
Bill, I'm telling you, Gustafsson went in there and put on the performance to beat John Jones. Wasn't Dominic Cruz? He lost it. I mean, Dominic Reyes. He lost to John Jones. Okay, he lost. Gustafsson defeated John Jones. I don't know what the judges saw, Bill. I don't know what you saw, Bill. But this fight was for Gustafsson. Like I said, I felt like he made 0 to no mistakes. And then John Jones turned it up in rounds 4 and 5 on him. But, dude, what a fight, man. Both of these guys at the end of this fight need to go to the hospital. Neither of them shows up for the post-fight interview. They're both limping out of the cage. What a good fight, man. I think I've gone back and watched this fight at least 10 times. Just got put into the Hall of Fame for one of the greatest title fights in light heavyweight history. But, Bill, I got excited just talking about this fight. But go ahead, give me your perspective. Tell me your wrong opinion of how John Jones won.
Well, I don't understand how you watched this fight 10 times and all 10 of those times couldn't figure out the way it really happened.
I know how it happened.
Which is
Gustafsson won.
Which is that it was a close fight. Gustafsson did well, but just well enough to lose this fight 4 rounds to 1.
No.
which is the way it should be properly scored. I went back and watched this fight recently, and I could see the argument for Gustafsson winning this fight, but he just didn't.
What? Oh, man.
And I'll use your argument from earlier, Jeff. The only people's opinion who matter are the judges who scored it.
Yeah. 3 people think that he didn't win that fight.
Yeah. So. Just like 3 people thought TJ Dillashaw didn't beat Dominic Cruz, which he did.
Oh, he didn't? No. He didn't win that fight.
Why? Because of the judges? That was your argument.
No, because he couldn't hit Dominic Cruz. The only strikes that were working were the leg kicks, and they didn't even come until the 4th round, Bill.
All right. I will concede that Dominic Cruz won that fight as long as you admit that John Jones won 4 rounds against Alexander Gustafsson. It was as clear of a victory as the second fight between John Jones and Alexander Gustafsson.
All right, that second fight, I got nothing for you. Alexander Gustafsson got annihilated.
I guess you're going to try and tell me that Gustafsson won that one too.
I saw John Jones tap, Bill. I saw John Jones tap.
Gustafsson was like, hey, you better give up. Let's see. I think, all right, so you've given 5. I guess I only have 1 more, but I have a bunch more written down. Here's a super obvious one. And it's Robbie Lawler and Rory McDonald part 2. fuck, man, I don't know. And I didn't want to pick this one because it's such an obvious choice. But goddamn, man, this fight was good. This fight was so good. I mean, just the end when Robbie Lawler's lip was hanging off of his face and he's just screaming like this visceral fucking savage scream, and his lip is just flapping off of
Yeah.
his face after this war he just went through with Rory McDonald for the second time. It gives me chills just thinking about it, Jeff. And I mean, this has to be a consensus, like one of the greatest fights of all time. Like, I don't know how you could watch this fight and not be in awe of mixed martial arts. Um, it going back and rewatching it a couple of times, it had its slow points. It did have its lulls, but those intense moments were so intense, and the finish was so intense, and Robbie Lawler's lip hanging off his face and him screaming into the camera was so intense that it makes up for all of that. That's not the parts that you remember. UFC 189. I just like to give all the timelines here if I can. If you've never seen this fight, this is a must watch. If you're gonna watch one UFC fight the rest of your life, it kind of has to be this one. These guys just put it all on the line, and man, I think I just expended all my energy into that description of it. And I don't know what else to say about it except this fight was fucking amazing. Robbie Lawler's face was hanging off of his face, Jeff.
yeah, dude.
Like his face was almost gone. Like he almost had to get a new face. And he won the fight.
Bill, speaking of needing a new face, you know that Rory McDonald needed a new nose because the Robbie Lawler smashed his in at the end of that fight. Jeez. Bill, I got to give it to you on that one, man. That is such a good fight. I remember seeing that live and just thinking the war that these guys went through, man. That was absolutely nuts. And man, like just thinking about that fight, because I actually thought Rory McDonald was going to win that fight up until, he dropped to the floor because he couldn't take getting hit in the face anymore. And it just, wow. I felt, that's kind of like, oh man, that's kind of how I felt with Silva and Sutton, where I felt like Rory McDonald. I was like, yes, man, this is it, dude. Like, everybody's been talking about how he's the next George St. Pierre, and now he's about to prove it. He's going to be the welterweight champion. And then he takes this one shot, Bill, at the end of that fight. And at first it looks like he doesn't do anything, and then you just see him cover up and just fall back because his body can physically not take the punishment from Robbie Lawler anymore. Yeah. Bill, both of these guys could be Greek gods, I don't know what they would rule over, but they could easily be Greek gods after that fight, man. Man, that's one of those. Huh?
I'd be okay with that. I don't think either one of them are Greek, but Rory McDonald's Canadian, and Robbie Lawler's from Iowa.
Yeah, dude, just man, like that fight, and you're right. There were rounds where it was a little lull, but dude,
as a complete body of work,
yes,
it's just it's just a fucking spectacle, man. And listening to Robbie Lawler, Roy McDonald described the knockout where he was like, he hit me and I didn't feel anything, and then I just saw white.
Jeez.
And then I stumbled backwards, and then the next thing I remember, the referee was pulling him off me, and it sends chills up my spine thinking about it, and that's why I had to include it on this list. I just had to. What a phenomenal performance from both of these guys, and just the ending and the fact that Robbie Lawler didn't give a fuck that his face was hanging off his face. Yeah, so that's number 5 for me, Jeff. I'm gonna allow you to give a few honorable mentions because I got a few for myself as well. So just give me like a high level recap of whatever you got left on your list. I'm just gonna tell you guys my opinions tonight have been brought to you by Weller Special Reserve. Not a sponsor of the show. I like to clarify that, but when I say my opinions have been brought to you by Weller, it's because that's what I've been drinking while I've been giving you my opinions. So Weller comes out of the Buffalo Trace Distillery. Super smooth bourbon, 90 proof. So, not the strongest, not the weakest. It's kind of right in the middle there. If you want to have a chill night, you go for the 80 proof. If you want to not feel like yourself, you go for the 100 proof. And if you want to just have a good time talking about some fights while there's a worldwide pandemic going on, you go for the 90 proof. And that's what I did. Real smooth, soft caramel flavor to it. Awesome color. This is what a bourbon should look like. Super hard to find, but very inexpensive. A handle of this, like I'm holding up here on YouTube, here, the 1.75 should only cost you about 30 something bucks if you can find it. And if you can, it's worth every penny. Vanilla on the palate for the aftertaste. And just super smooth. So we've both given 5. I think, Jeff, I kind of lost count, but according to my check marks here, we both given 5. Give me a couple more with like a high level recap of each.
All right, I'm going to give you 2 honorable mentions. One, Bill, surprisingly, is a Dominic Cruz a loss on this list. Well, a few fights he's lost. I got to give it to Dominic Cruz versus Cody Garbrandt. New Year's Eve, I want to say, gosh, what's it been, like 2 or 3 years now? Maybe 4 years? I think that was my first year teaching second year teaching that New Year's Eve. I don't know, whatever. But anyway, it was December 30th, 2000 and something teen. And I'm thinking, listen, this guy's a mincemeat for Dominic Cruz, but he went out there and did to Dominic Cruz what Dominic Cruz did to TJ Dillashaw in his win against him, and danced around him, was unable to. Bill, where did you get these glasses?
So my wife has a costume drawer that the baby has since discovered during this quarantine. So she brought these glasses into my office and left them in here. Hey, for those of you not watching on YouTube, when Jeff is in the middle of a really passionate statement, I put on these glasses that are like fake eyeballs with blood dripping down, and it's brought me a lot of joy to watch his reaction every time I put them on. But go ahead, tell me more about Cody Garbrandt.
Oh man,
Cruz and
oh man. Anyway, yeah. So Cody Garbrandt is, he's dancing around Dominic Cruz, moving really well, and taunting Dominic Cruz the entire fight. Man, Dominic Cruz can't hit him. Dominic Cruz is being forced to, instead of counterpunch, he's being the aggressor, which he hates doing. And Cody Garbrandt basically, did to him what he does to everybody else in the bantamweight division. And I was so impressed with Cody Garbrandt. And, at one point, he even does a push-up in the middle of the octagon because he knows Dominic Cruz can't touch him. The few times that they went to the ground, it was all Cody Garbrandt. He outstruck him, outgrappled him. So really impressive. And, it's one of those performances where if Cody Garbrandt weren't so emotional and fought, very technical, very sustained, very focused, the way he fought against Dominic Cruz, he'd probably still be the bantamweight champion. So that's my one highlight. The other one is a little bit more mainstream, Bill. This is the last fight that we watched together when I was down in Florida last year, is DC versus Daniel Cormier versus Stipe Miocic, 2 for the rematch for the heavyweight championship, because it was looking like more of the same for DC. You
Was
know,
that the last fight you were here for?
yeah, it
Because
was last April.
I thought it was Holloway, Poirier, and Adesanya Gastelum.
Might have been that. But I
Yeah,
remember,
that's where I thought you were going with that because I had Gastelum Adesanya on my list as an honorable mention as
I might
well.
be getting
I thought you were here
gotcha.
for that. We were watching in the backyard on the projector.
Yeah, I was there for that. I'm getting my dates mixed up, but actually that is definitely on the honorable mention list. But I'll leave that one to you. But yeah, so DC versus Cormier. I mean DC versus Stipe Miocic. It's looking like more of the same for Miocic. It's looking like DC is gonna, keep up the strategy that helped him win the title in the first place in the heavyweight division, where he's using his uppercuts a lot. And despite the height and the reach advantage, DC is getting inside of Stipe Miocic's guard and just able to piece him up on the feet, which, I didn't expect that to happen twice. And then in the fourth round, Bill, Stipe Miocic changes up the game plan, focuses on one spot, and that's that liver, man. And he hit DC hard in that liver, probably 3 or 4 times in that fourth round. And then DC's body just shut down. It gave out on him, and Miocic was able to get the finish here. So for me, that fight was kind of a redemption for Stipe Miocic, and I feel like it's going to set up a very, very good storyline if they do have a trilogy fight, which I would love to happen. But for me, those two are my honorable mentions. Fantastic fights. I just, we don't have time to talk about every fight on the list, so
Yeah,
definitely honorable mentions.
yeah, great picks, man. I have a bunch of honorable mentions left.
Go for it. We got time. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, I'm not either. I mean, we're at an hour and a half now. This is a long episode for us, but hey, people have nothing better to do. Everybody's sitting at home, right? Real quick, I'll go over this one real quick. Fedor Emelianenko versus Mirko Cro Cop and Pride is a must watch. I'll leave it at that. Go watch that fight. At that time, Fedor was the king of the world. Nobody thought anybody would come close to beating him, and Cro Cop came really close. If you've never seen that fight, go and watch it. Kelvin Gastelum and Israel Adesanya, which, if I'm correct, Jeff, was the last fight you were here for. It was that card where the main event was Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway, which is another amazing fight. But Gastelum and Adesanya, man, it was just one of those fights. It was like, oh, he's going to knock him out. No, he's going to knock him out. And he's down. And like, you didn't know what was going to happen. Adesanya came away with the decision. That was a great one. I feel like we have to have some women's fights that we talk about. Obviously, Ioane and Jacek and Wiley Zhang.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But we've talked about that so recently.
Yeah.
For me, the best female fight of all time, Holly Holm and Miesha Tate. And probably not a lot of people expecting to hear that. But for me, I'll tell you where I was, Jeff. I was in Montclair, New Jersey. I went to see Jim Norton do stand-up, who is the host of the UFC Unfiltered podcast. He wasn't at the time. And then he hosted a watch party in the theater for that fight, which was UFC 145, I want to say. No, it was much later than that. I'm sorry. It was UFC 204, I think. It was Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz won.
Yeah, I think that's 204 or 205.
I don't remember. But yeah, man. So I was sitting in this theater. Jim Norton was on the stage and like kind of giving commentary here and there. But I just remember Holly Holm beating the brakes off of Miesha Tate for a majority of this fight. And Miesha Tate had to finish this fight. Like, she was obviously going to lose if it went to decision. And she had gotten beaten up and rocked pretty bad in this fight. And she just used her grappling, man, and took Holly Holm down and got that rear naked choke and put her out cold. left her twitching on the canvas. And I just remember, we had dramatic finishes in women's MMA before, and that there have been big knockouts like late in a fight or unexpected knockouts like Holly Holm knocking out Ronda Rousey and things like that. But nothing like this, man. Nothing that was that emotionally taxing where it was like, Misha's going to lose this fight. Holy shit, she just submitted her. For me, that was an amazing one. And then the last one I'll give you, which is kind of an obscure one, Chris Lieben versus Tony Martin. And I remember this one distinctly because I can picture it so clearly in my head. Like I just replay it so vividly. This was a war back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I think it was in the third round. I didn't look it back up before doing this, but Terry Martin was a big, thick 185-pound fighter, and he had hit Chris Lieben clean. I think it was in the third round, and you see this look on Chris Lieben's face, and I can replay it in my head so clearly, where he was just like this, and his eyes open up wide, and he looks like he's about to get knocked out, and he leans all the way back, and then all of a sudden, he just leans back forward like Michael Jackson in the Smooth Criminal video, just leaning completely forward, and just clocks Terry Martin and knocks him out cold. And it was one of the most dramatic finishes I've ever seen in my life. And that was an obscure one I wanted to give for you guys because probably a lot of people haven't seen that fight. And God damn, that was a good fight, Jeff. It was so good because you think like Terry Martin got him, he caught him. And then that's when we figured out that Chris Lieben is one of these guys who fights better when he gets clipped, when he gets rocked, when he gets hit hard. There's just like a button that goes off in his brain where he's like, all right, fight mode, and I got to come forward. And he knocked Tony Martin out. And Terry Martin, sorry. I don't know if I've been saying Tony Martin the whole time, but it's Terry Martin. And that was it for me, Jeff. That's all my honorable mentions, but there are so many more. And I realized how difficult it is to put this list together. I'm interested in hearing everybody's opinion on the greatest fights ever. Because every time this conversation comes up, I'm reminded of fights that, I forgot about, but then I remember exactly where I was watching that fight. And that's the beauty of this sport, Jeff. There are so many fights we have now, and the market's so saturated. Unfortunately, not at the moment right now because so many events have been canceled due to this coronavirus. But there are just so many great fights where you remember exactly where you were and exactly how you felt at that moment when you watched it happen. Even if you were watching a replay that you didn't know the result of, which, we've gone over a couple of those. So hopefully we've given you guys some content to go back and look up, while you're home with nothing to do over this extraordinarily long podcast for us. This is almost double the length. We usually try to keep it 45 minutes to an hour. We're at an hour and 38 minutes as we speak, Jeff. This is very unusual. But any last thoughts you want to get off your chest here, bud?
Oh, dude, I have so many more fights we could talk about, man. One I wanted to mention was Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor 2. That was one of the last fights we watched together, Bill, when you were still living up here.
What was the name of that bar we watched that at?
That was Bar 1 in my town.
Bar 1. That's North dude. Bergen, right?
Yeah. Actually, I'm thinking my high school reunion might be there. I can't believe it's been 10 years since I graduated high school, Bill. Time flies, and I have done absolutely nothing with my life. So, but yeah. Yeah, dude. That was a good one for me. But anyway, I'm not going to get too into it because then we'll just be here all night talking about really good fights, which, the conversation never ends on that. So, if anybody out there is watching this or listening to us, leave us a comment. Tell us what fights are in your top 5 list, or top 10, whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
Maybe we
Yeah.
could go back and watch them. Maybe there are fights that we didn't even think about, and then like you said, Bill, like sitting there and reflecting, you're just like, holy macaroni, that fight was pretty awesome too. So
Yeah. Well, I first and foremost, I hope we've given you guys a little bit of a distraction from everything that's going on in the world, all the craziness out there with COVID-19. Those of you who are quarantined and uh, held up with nothing to do, we wanted to give you guys an extra long episode and hopefully give you guys some more content in the weeks to come. Maybe we'll talk about some non-MMA stuff too, but we wanted to put something together for you guys. So that was a bit of a distraction. Hopefully we were able to accomplish that. In either case, reach out to us on social media. Let us know what you think about what we're doing here. Leave us a review wherever you're listening or wherever you're watching. It definitely helps out the show, helps other people find the show. And that's all we can do, man. We can do our part to provide a bit of a distraction during these crazy times. We hope everybody's safe out there. Of course, you're taking every precaution you can to protect yourself and your families. And if you want to reach out to us on social media, you can reach Jeff at animal_Wilson on Twitter and Instagram. And you guys know how to get a hold of me. It's at MMA on the Rocks everywhere on social media. You can send me an email if you'd like, mmaontherocks@gmail.com. I do like when you guys send me emails. Let me know what you're thinking. I like when you guys send me DMs too. I try to respond as frequently as I can. Being the parent of a 2-year-old, I don't get to spend so much time on social media. I block out the time to do the podcast, and then my social media time is somewhat limited. But reach out to us. Let us know what you're thinking and drinking out there while you're all quarantined and dealing with this viral pandemic. We're all going to get through it together. Remember, it's all about your attitude. Until next time. Cheers, everybody. Goodbye.